Well, I really attribute what's happening in gold to the realization that it is the only true safe haven asset. I mean, what were named safe haven assets? The dollar, and we're watching the world because the world doesn't know what President Trump is going to do. So they've lost a lot of that confidence, and that's a huge problem because what you've got is the world turning away from all the debt that the U.S. has to issue, and yet that's the foundation of the global markets, which is kind of why I said I'm not sure that we haven't already triggered a crisis and it's just not visible to us yet. I think the realization on a global basis that gold is first of all, it is the only financial asset that runs no counterparty risk. But when you're in a sea of discord and confusion and back and forth, well, those typical safe haven assets just don't work. And so gold is again being elevated on the financial stage where it should be, where it absolutely has been for thousands and thousands of years. And I think it's that recognition and that acknowledgement, because global central banks surely have not slowed down their buying of gold. They've slowed down their buying of treasury debt, but they have not slowed down their buying of gold. And that puts us in actually an even more precarious position because, again, if the treasury, the 10-year treasury is what the foundation of the global financial system is, and we're losing support for that system, the volatility was one thing, right? And that's a key thing. You can't tell me that something might not have gotten broken because that makes absolutely no sense at all, especially in the derivatives world, which is so opaque. We have no clue. We see a little itty bitty tip of the iceberg, but it's what's underneath that tip that we see. It's what we can't see. That's what's dangerous. And I see developing this consistent doom loop, right? If the treasury underpins the markets and that's eroding the global markets and that's eroding, well, when's it going to collapse? And that's what nobody knows. Well, yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And it goes back to my point about the world starting to recognize gold as a safe haven asset. And so really, this is a con game. And it requires two key things. It requires confidence. That's the most important thing. But it also requires new money, right? Those two things. So, yeah, gold's rise would threaten the current money, the central bank guided money system where they are dictating, well, at least the nominal value, while they're at the same time manipulating the purchasing power value, which is really what matters to you and me. You know, everybody knows my $10 trillion Zimbabwe note, and I can't buy eggs with it. So it makes absolute sense because the higher that gold goes, the more eyes are on it, the more participation you get. So, yeah, is the world really starting to switch to a gold standard again? Well, look at what just recently happened with the repatriation in the U.S. of the physical gold and the physical silver market. You know, central banks know if you don't hold it, you don't own it, because they're integral to that system. And so actually, you know, those fat fingers that were taking possession, you know, I'm not necessarily looking at the world as much as what's happening here in the U.S. and the distrust of the U.S. dollar and the acknowledgement, I'll bet maybe not verbal yet, but with the repatriation of all of that gold and all of that silver. Gold is the primary monetary metal. I think that there is a huge shift that's going on, and I can't say that it's just foreign buyers. I think that it's a lot of U.S. buyers too, because we're giving up we gave up the contracts. I mean, they're still manipulating the market and buying the gold and silver, you know, futures contracts, but really who was taking delivery, right? That's not usually what happens in the US. They just make their money on that spread between the contract, et cetera, moving up. So I'd say that it is within our shores that we've got entities, and JP Morgan would probably know who they are much better than I do. But I think that we've been witnessing gold repatriation, and that changes the whole game. So that's a pipe dream. And that's something that when the founding fathers that set up this system, not the original ones that did the Constitution, but the ones that agreed to this fiat money system, they knew that the people could not hope but that these would regain some of that lost purchasing power. And it's kind of interesting because, I have a couple of new people that are part of our production team. And so I always love it when new people come in because they have such a different perspective. They have the man on the street perspective, which frankly, I've been doing this my whole life. I don't really have that perspective anymore. And we were having this conversation with Mimi, and she was talking about how much her rent has exploded. But that's okay because it pulled back a little bit. So it must be getting back to normal. And that's what people think, right? So you have this big inflationary run up, then that inflation still continues but slows down a bit, or even the prices, because nothing goes straight up, nothing goes straight down. You got the bounces along the way. So that big, huge run up in rent that we saw has pulled back a little bit. And then people go, okay, the dollar's regaining more of its purchasing power. They don't really say that because they don't understand that, but they'll say something like, so it's getting better. Yeah. I mean, we're getting back to normal, but we aren't back to normal. We are at the end of this massive experiment, and we are shifting into a new digital age. And there's no stopping that. But no, the dollar's not going to regain any purchasing power. Look at the chart. It never, ever does. It doesn't. It might bounce a little bit here and there, but that trend is crystal clear. And when you talk about the spending and the money savings in this country, the spending is still more than what we're taking in. It is massive deficit spending. And there's always this promise that if we do this now, in 10 years, we're going to save so much money. But people's thought process is really short. And that just doesn't happen. But high inflation happens. And then the public comes out and goes, oh, wait a minute, the dollar's not regaining. It's not regaining. No, it never does. All that is a big bag of hopium. At least that's what those that are in power want you to believe. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the inflation of the 70s when Nixon took us off the gold standard. And let me tell you, nobody ever said that inflation was good. Inflation became good when the system died or after the system died in 2008. So, by default, well, yeah, the current system is about constantly compounding debt. And now we're constantly compounding debt in a significantly higher interest rate environment. And that means that we'll just see debts and deficits grow and grow and grow. But it also means that those zombie corporations, which are corporations that have not had income enough to pay all of their interest payment, forget any principal, for at least 3 years, we're going to see those zombie corporations for who they really are. The fact that they are dead because they cannot support higher debt levels at this higher interest rate. And so there really is there's no choice. To fight higher inflation, we need higher interest rates to create that deflation. But then we get that deflation and we need inflation to pull us out of deflation. And we're at the end. There's nothing to work with anymore. Nothing to work with. And that's not me. That's the central bank telling you. And I love the fact that on that lower left-hand axis in terms of purchasing power, they have a big fat goose egg, big fat zero. So that's the Federal Reserve telling you what the real value of this junk is. And the markets are still not telling you the true value of this. Not.